So now we have the camera oriented, and if we were to play through it, let's just look at it over here in the camera view. Let's just make that big, and we're going to play through it, and you can see that it's kind of coming into view here, and then it looks right, and then it's coming towards the camera. There's a little twist in here, and it's going into the window. Alright, so the one thing I'm going to point out is that we have 24 frames. This was set when you created the curve length, the length of the camera move, the time of the camera move was set to whatever was in the timeline, and since the timeline wasn't showing, it defaulted to 24, and we want to make this longer. 24 frames is 1 second, and that's not really enough time. That's very, very quick camera move. We're going to want to make this about 200 frames, give or take. I mean, it depends on what kind of camera move you are doing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lengthen my my timeline here, and I'm also going to go into here. I'm going to go into, this is the length of the timeline. The right one is the length of the timeline globally, and this is how you can, this is the working area, so I can make it 200 frames timeline, but I can also compress it down and have a working, if 200 frames is too many keyframes to be working with, I can adjust it this way. So I'm going to make it 200 because that seems like a good number, and then I'm going to expand it out so the whole timeline is 200, but the camera move is still at 24 frames a second. The best way probably to adjust this is to go into the your graph editor. So I'm going to go to Animation Editors, Graph Editor, and you can see, I'm going to open this up a little bit, there is a curve, motion path curve, and that is actually giving you your animation. And I'm going to just navigate, make this a little smaller so you can see that. So the motion path is selected, and what you can do is you can see the keyframe down here in the timeline, is that you can select a keyframe, press Shift, press W and Shift, and you can lengthen, you can make the length of that that animation, the timeline. It was at 24, and if you look here, I'm going to try to zoom in on this as well. There's a number, the ending number at the end of the timeline, and you can see it's at 88. And if I move it, you can see that it's actually updating what frame number that is at, and I can get to exactly the number. So I'm going to go to 200, and I'm going to get to 199. It's not going to let me. Let's just zoom in a little bit here so I can get it exactly 200. There we go. And now my animation, my camera animation, is at 200 frames, and it's going to be approximately I'd say about 8 or 9 seconds long for that camera move. And then let's just take a look at it in the camera perspective here, and then it's turning here, turning the corner, and we're just going into the window, and it's going to take about 200 frames. Now, the one other thing I want to do is that maybe, since we've reoriented the camera, that this curve is not necessarily what we are, the camera isn't sort of doing what we intended it to do. I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to grab this ground plane, I'm going to make a layer, and I'm going to make the ground plane invisible, just so we can see this a little easier. If the ground plane's just there, I just turn the visibility off. So what I'm going to do is I am going to change this curve in order to adjust the camera move so it's a little more what was originally intended. Okay, so to do that, let's just go into this. I'm going to select the curve. I'm going to right click over that and go to Control Vertex, and that gives me these control points here that I had that make up your CV curve. And I'm going to just move along the timeline a little bit just to move the camera out of the way, and I'm going to go to this first CV point, and I'm going to move that like that. I'm going to go to the second one. I'm going to adjust it. So I'm just adjusting the path of the curve. The camera's going to follow along this curve, and I'm just adjusting it, and I can actually go and do this interactively. I can look in my camera view and work in the perspective view and adjust my camera according to how I want it to compose the shot. And you can just sort of do a little trial and error here. And just kind of move through. And we're doing a little camera move through here. You may want to go in and adjust this little, maybe smooth this out a little bit, like so. You can even delete if there's a control vertice or a point that's just really not working for you. You can actually delete it if you want. Be careful that you don't delete too much and whatnot. So as you're moving through the scene, we can move through the scene, and you can see that I've adjusted that camera to keep things composed to how I've set up the house and the background here. And so there's some easy and pretty straightforward ways of putting your camera onto a control curve like that and adjusting the control curve. If you're just not completely happy with it, you can always adjust it after you've created the curve, and it's just a matter of just kind of going back and forth. One more thing I just want to show you. I'm going to bring the ground plane back. We have this background, and as you can see, we're seeing off of the side of the background. I'm going to go into the camera view, and we're kind of seeing off to the sides here, and we're seeing off to the side there, and that's just a matter of scale. First thing I'm going to do is I am going to select my ground plane. I'm going to go into perspective view to do this because I just want to see a bigger view, and I'm going to scale this whole ground plane up, and I'm going to scale it out like that. It doesn't need to be scaled thickness so much, and so I've scaled that up, and it's going off of the sides. I just wanted to go outside of the frame line there, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the sky background. Now if you have a low resolution image or something like that, it's going to show up. You're going to see the quality, but this is not such a bad resolution. It's a pretty big image, and I want to move it back. Okay, and I'm going to move it back behind the ground plane here. I'm going to move it down a little bit, but I'm also going to be scaling it up pretty big because the sky is big, so I'm going to just make sure that that is scaled, and I'm going to widen it a little bit, maybe scale it that way, and then bring it up into position so it's just below the ground there, and I can move it around, I can adjust it. So now when this renders and the camera move, it's not going to see off of the edges of your background here, and you can kind of look and check and see, and you've got some some nice things going on here. And the background and the ground plane are going to stay within the confines of the frame. And now if you want to check your animation here, you can go to, you can just do a RAM preview here, and this is not going to show you, this is going to not show you true motion. In order to show true motion, you have to make what's called a play blast, and I will show you that in another video, but just briefly, if you right click over your timeline, you go to play blast, open up the options, and you can make a play blast animation here. You want to save it to file, and you want to put it, like I like to put it on my desktop, call it house, something like that. Make a play blast. This takes a few minutes sometimes, depending on how big your file is, how much stuff you have going on in your animation. But what this will do is this will make a QuickTime video AVI of your animation, and it'll allow you to see it accurately to speed. So let's just give this a few seconds. I'm going to stop it in just a second. It's going to take more than just a few minutes to do the whole thing, but you can get the idea. So I'm going to escape it there. I'm going to stop it, and let's just take a look and see what we've got. We can see and this is just the 50 or so frames that I had rendered, and then you can see how your animation is accurately coming together. That is different than a render. A render is actually a rendered frame that I'm going to do here, and you can see here this is what a rendered frame would look like. Higher quality. You can adjust the quality to whatever, and this is looking pretty nice. We've got a nice looking scene here with a tree and some grass in the background, even though it's not the original background. The other background's much nicer, but this one works, and you can see how your scene is coming together quality wise.